Now, there are currently 650 seats in the House of Commons. By the next election, that number will be reduced to 600. In a giant game of musical chairs, the boundary commissions for England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland are deciding which seats will disappear and what the new constituency boundaries will look like. But the process is controversial. Labour have accused the government of gerrymandering. Well, Sam Hartley joins us now. He's from the Boundary Commission for England, who are today launching their second consultation on the proposed changes. What are you hoping to achieve, Sam?
Well, thank you, Joe. Yes, as you say, today marks the start of the second stage of the Boundary Commission for England's review and the boundary review across the UK as a whole. Back in September, I came and told you all about the first cut, the first set of boundaries that we proposed, and we consulted on those for 12 weeks until December, and we had an incredible amount of response from the general public. Nearly 20,000 representations put into us, some really impassioned, well-argued, well-evidenced representations put to us in those 12-week periods. And we travelled the country and we heard from people direct as well at public events everywhere. Today is all about publishing what people have said and asking the public to have a look at that, have a look at the different and individual submissions that people made to us and tell us where they agree and where they don't agree. And all of that evidence we'll take into account before we come up with any revisions to our proposals.
So when will we know exactly which seats are going to be taken off the electoral map?
Well, our final recommendations will go to Parliament in September 2018, so there's a little bit more to go through this stage. What happens after today? For 4 weeks we're consulting on all those 20,000 odd representations that I told you about. We'll then take all of the evidence that we received back in the autumn of last year and also in the next 4 weeks, and our commissioners will work away and really drill into the detail of the community-based arguments that people have put to us. If we then want to revise our proposals, we'll consult on those later in 2017 before, as I say, we'll report to Parliament in September 2018.
What do you say, though, to criticism that you're using an outdated electoral register, the one from 2015, and not the updated one post the EU referendum?
Well, what I say is a fairly technical answer, I'm afraid. It is the law. So the Boundary Commission doesn't have any scope to change that set of electoral data. There's got to be a cut somewhere. So there has to be a point in time where we say, right, that's the data we're using, so everyone knows exactly what electoral data they're working from. And as I say, the law dictates to us that it's that December 2015 register.
Sam Hartley, thank you very much. Well, we're joined now by the Labour MP Stephen Kinnock and the Conservative MP John Penrose, who as a minister was the architect of some of these changes. Welcome to the programme. John Penrose, you used to be the government minister responsible for precisely these changes. What do you say to the charge that actually you've used this as a mechanism for the convenience of the Conservative Party and gerrymandering, as Labour have accused you of?
Well, I think it's hard to argue it's gerrymandering if you're making the constituencies all the same size, so each individual vote has the same weight no matter where you are in the country. In fact, it's making the system a great deal fairer. And it is really important that we don't delay any longer, because you mentioned that the electoral registers that will be used were done in 2015. At the moment, the existing boundaries are done on the basis of electoral registers from 2001. They're really, really out of date. By the time the next general election comes around, they're going to be almost 20 years old. So we've got to get on with this. We can then do it more frequently in future. We probably need to do it every 5 years. That's what's planned in future. So there won't be such long gaps. But we've got to keep this thing more up to date than it is.
What's wrong with making parliamentary constituencies roughly the same size?
Well, the Conservatives know that there is a disproportionate number of Labour seats which are relatively small, and that's why this is a gerrymander, because it's about eliminating those seats. What could have been done, they've set a very narrow margin of plus or minus 5% of the electoral quota. That could have been set, for example, at plus or minus 10% in order to have more flexibility when you set the seats, and also to give to avoid these bizarre situations where, for example, in my constituency, a constituency line is going through the middle of the shopping centre, with the high street in one constituency and the shopping centre in another.
Presumably they're consulting on that, though, aren't they?
They're consulting on it, but the current proposal says that it's massively disrespectful to local communities.
Right, I mean, looking at the figures and work that's been done on this, Labour are going to lose 13% of their seats and the Tories are going to lose just 4.5% of theirs. Are you saying there's no political motivation behind this?
Well, I'm not going to make any apology for getting equal votes.
It just so happens that it will benefit the Conservatives.
And I think that, with all due respect to Stephen, I think he's rather giving the game away. Labour have had an inbuilt advantage under the old system because it's so out of date, and they want to preserve that inbuilt unfair advantage. Hanging on to an unfair advantage is not right.
And it has been an unfair advantage, hasn't it? Because if you look at the different sizes of constituencies, is, if Labour has more seats that are below the average size, then that is unfair too, in exactly the same way you are accusing John Penrose of being.
Well, I think you've got to adjust the system in a way which doesn't make it look like a barefaced gerrymander, which this clearly does.
But do you think there was an inbuilt advantage to Labour up until this point?
Well, there's the demographics of the country have led to certain larger numbers of Labour constituencies having smaller numbers. The way that you adjust that is not by having such a tight margin around the electoral quota, make it more than 5%. But what I think it also reflects is a worrying trend of this government moving towards an elective dictatorship. They've done the trade union legislation, which is massively undermining the Labour Party. They had to be dragged kicking and screaming by the courts to come and talk about Brexit. And now we see these boundary reviews. I think there's a pattern emerging here, which is Theresa May's Downing Street is about control freakery and about steamrollering the opposition out of the way. And I think that's worrying for our democracy.
Or the opposition hasn't been strong enough up until now to challenge some of these.
Well, that's probably a subject for another interview, Jo. But,
right. I mean, but just to put the truth, but answer the charge that Theresa May is adopting control freakery at number 10 and steamrolling the opposition and putting through undemocratic proposals.
Normally, if you get that sort of charge, it's not directed against a government that's got a notional majority of 12. It's quite finely balanced in Parliament at the moment. It isn't that we've got a 100-vote majority, 100 more MPs than anybody else like Tony Blair had, and we can just ram through whatever we like. If we get this wrong, there's plenty of scope for difficulties in Parliament.
I mean, one might say that with the position in Scotland for the Labour Party, your loss in Copeland, is this the sort of last-ditch attempt of a desperate party?
No, I think it's pointing out that we've got to have a fair way of doing things, and the vast number of additional registrations that came from the referendum should be taken into account. There's also this argument about the cost, but with Brexit we're losing our MEPs, and also a huge number of powers and responsibilities are coming back to the British Parliament. The Great Repeal Bill is going to be a huge undertaking. This government is looking to steamroller it through with statutory instruments and other tools, and I think it's very worrying for the future of our democracy.
Patient Wheatcroft, on the issue of gerrymandering and the redrawing of these boundaries, if it looks as if the government is being unfair, that will not help them in their plea to reset constitutionally how we elect our MPs.
Well, there'll always be winners and losers in any boundary changes. And it's not surprising that Stephen's looking at that and then conflating all sorts of other complaints about the government into this issue when it's a very separate one. And it's been running for a long time. The Boundary Commission is independent. There have been extensive consultations. There's now another consultation. It needs to be done. And what can be unfair about having equal constituencies?
Right, except, and although I take Sam Hartley's point about it being the law, should you not have changed the law before conducting this massive constitutional reform so that you didn't exclude 2 million voters from this process by using an old register?
Well, as I said, the register that's currently being used for the existing boundaries is even older. It's back from 2001.
But that's not a justification for not doing a more...
Well,
two wrongs don't make a right.
No, absolutely. But what it means is that in future we need to not let the gap be nearly so wide between each one.
But that's still not answering my question about the problem now, is it?
I see. Well, we can't unpick that now and go back. You take primary legislation, and effectively what people who are suggesting this mean is they need a primary piece of an act of Parliament to do it, which entirely coincidentally, I'm sure, would mean that the boundaries wouldn't happen until after the next general election. I'm sure they don't mean that to happen.
Right. I mean, it is an urgent review that's needed now. If you delay it any further, then it will be even more outdated.
Yeah, but I mean, John Maynard Keynes said, when the facts change, I change my mind. What do? There's a huge fact on the ground here, which is that there are 2 million extra voters. The benchmark that's being used for this exercise is completely wrong, and it's being used because there's a hidden agenda.
As you know, there are suggestions that supporters of Jeremy Corbyn within the Labour Party could use this as an excuse to get rid of some of the more centrist Labour MPs. Do you think that's true?
No, I mean, I think we all are there as elected MPs and we take our chances, and we're there to fight our corner. We fight for our constituents, and that is what I'm doing here. I'm trying to be here the voice of my constituents who've been deeply disrespected by a boundary review which is ramming, on the basis of a mathematical formula, a boundary line across hundreds of years of history of our community. It's completely unacceptable.
I'll just say I have some sympathy with Stephen on the particular case-specific point. That's what the Independent Boundary Commission will need to listen to from anybody around the country who's got that individual concern about their specific boundaries, and they will, I'm sure, be wanting to take that into account. That's perfectly legitimate.
All right, John Penrose, Stephen Kinnock, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Now,